in the Penny W. Stamps School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan, and the Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning, also at the University of Michigan. And he's going to be our moderator for this next section, so you are in his very capable hands. But I will say this, he is an artist as well as a designer, and he prefers to be called a maker, and I know this because I'm also married to him. So, without further ado, John Marshall.
All right, so the whole Penny W. Stamps School of Art and Design thing is because we just got endowed on Thursday. So that was a $40 million payday. Woohoo. There was a nice moment during the last session where Rick, you said, I don't know what you're talking about, to John, who's going to be our next speaker. That, I think, is indicative of what today hopefully is about. And that's design futures, right? I mean, design is a process. Suzanne has set this up as on your program, as design does. It's emphasizing the verb rather than the noun. We're not talking about necessarily industrial design or the design of the 20th century. We're talking about the design of the 21st century. And then I think there's a generational shift underway. I think we're having to hybridize and manufacture terminology to talk about what is being designed, what we're going to do. So hopefully we're going to hear from 4 presenters that are going to talk about that. I mean, just going through their bios, there's things like social entrepreneurship, service design, experience strategy, events, experiences, you know, it just goes on, you know, and we're not necessarily talking about artifacts for consumption, we're talking about things that are done. So, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome John Caldwell here. He's the founder and director of the Austin Center for Design, and he's going to tell you all about what he does. So, thank you.
Anybody now a designer? Okay. All right. It's a good time to be a designer. There's this sense that we've arrived, and that's sort of step 1 here. For a lot of years, design was relegated as sort of a styling industry, commodity, something that came in at the end and did the plastics and industrial design. And we're in the midst of a very large professional shift, which is very positive and also a little bit troubling. But a little bit of a history. I think most of us study things like this, and if you actually went here, you probably still study things like this. And this is Bauhaus-driven form, the mission of creating things that are utilitarian and functional, but at the same time have sort of a really nice gestalt of presence to them, a simplicity of form. And so when you study things like this, you take classes in 2D design, 3D design, and color theory, and composition, and sort of the table stakes of what it meant for a very long time to be a designer. And design has always been a big deal, but only to designers. Nobody really knew else outside of our little group it was that we did. And then it's changed, and it's changed in the last 8 years, where words like this started to create things like innovation and experience. And this helped a lot, or hurt, depending on your perspective, because a lot of this stuff began to show up in popular culture related to business. And so suddenly, this styling exercise about color and type and things like that got thrust into this view of business strategy. And for many of us, we were like, that's really cool, I don't know what that means, and it's scary. Suddenly my paycheck just doubled, and therefore my title is now executive director. What does that mean? How do I do it? That's good. It's also a little weird. But it gives us a seat at the table. And so in many businesses now, you'll start to find things like chief design officer, or somebody at an executive level that's actually empowered to make design decisions along with the chief executive officer or the chief financial officer. And now it's gaining sort of even more hyperbole, depending on the circles that you travel in and the news you listen to. It's seen as sort of a prime mover for the next century, and this is coming straight from our administration. And so I'm not sure what a larger voice you need than to have the Obama White House say stuff like, to win the future, we must out-innovate. And if we're going to equate design and innovation as the same thing, which I think is troubling, but we seem to be doing, that's essentially the White House telling us that you are going to solve the future, you're going to help us win. I don't know what that means either when you win at global nomination. And you also start to see like this, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the Valley right now, the idea of design is this magical, mystical thing that is going to make or break a startup. And somehow, whether you're on the team or not, is going to define whether or not a startup in Silicon Valley gets under $20 million in venture capital or not. And this is the type of rhetoric that's emerging over and over. That's very exciting. Don't look behind the curtain. We've all seen this. We've probably already used it. It's beautiful, isn't it? Do you see the wood grain? Look at the detail there. And it's weird because it's the same wood grain. It's so strange. How did they find such a perfect piece of wood that has the same knot repeated every 45 or every 450 pixels or so? It's so strange. And look at when you move the page, it looks like it's a real page, but it's not a real page because it's on your phone. So it looks like a real. Isn't that clever? It looks like a real page. This is the Dreamliner. This one, IDSA, is best in show. This is the best new product, was the Dreamliner. Best new product, 2011. I have a lot of things that I'm going to make fun of really quickly. This is a news release from Austin that the Naturally Curly Network just got $1.2 million in venture capital to support a social network for people who have wavy, curly, and kinky hair. Cohort raised $3 million because it allows for hierarchical groups. So groups can have as many subgroups as the user would like. I mean, I could just cherry pick these all days. We're really good at designing stuff, and we're really bad at picking what to design. So we end up designing airplanes. We already have airplanes, but we make them bigger and with more blue lights. And we start designing apps, and apps are really cool. And so we end up designing things like this. So if you go to the Apple iStore, you can download Have to Pee, which will tell you where the toilet is in your immediate vicinity. And that's totally ridiculous. But it's not just that that's totally ridiculous, because if you actually do go to the App Store, you'll find that there's multiple Have to Pees, and you can pick the best one. And it's also interesting to me that they all use the same sort of iconography to indicate what it is that a toilet finder will do, which is, oh my god, my legs together because I'm going to pee really bad. Good job, designers. So there's a selection problem. We're selecting the wrong problems to focus on when we're making math and finding apps, but arguably it's not our fault, because if you've ever actually done work in real life, and even if you don't want to work on a bathroom finder, you end up surrounded by things like this. Organizational roadblocks. You're not in a position to affect change. You might find yourself in a culture of consensus where everyone has to agree, and you're the lone voice of dissent saying, really, bathroom finding app people? Really? Like, aren't there more pressing problems? And fundamentally, this is business, right? And so we're constrained by billability and utilization and all of the crap that comes with running a business. And whether you like it or not, that's how you keep the lights on and keep the heat on. I thought this was a little interesting when I was poking around for Detroitish things. Henry Ford, our good friend, actually had a really unique view on what the purpose of business was. This greedy capitalist actually said in his autobiography, power and machinery, money and goods are useful only as they set us free to live. And so even from sort of the same people that have set in motion this capitalistic trend, their intent was maybe something different than how it has turned out, which is really interesting to me. I feel pretty strongly that these organizational structures should exist only as a way to enable this powerful change to happen in the world, the same powerful change that Henry Ford was talking about. And right now, in my experience, dealing with my alumni, dealing with myself, and dealing with all of my friends and family, these organizational structures are disabling us. They're not helping us help the world. They're not helping us achieve magic. And so the only way that I can think to achieve that magic and help the world is to get out of that organizational machine, to leave it behind, and to work on problems worth solving. And so I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit and actually explain what I mean by that. And I'll do so by way of a conversation around technology, because everybody know what that is. My students don't know what that is. Yeah, well, I mean, it was invented in 1982 and it became obsolete about 8 years ago, right? That's really freaky. That's an incredibly short lifespan, and it's not an anomaly. These are both digital cameras. That's the first digital camera in which Kodak wasn't even sure was going to work, so they badged it as a Nikon. They sold the rights of it. And this is a digital camera with greater power for $22 as an OEM component. And that's pretty amazing. And then this one's really great, because I don't know if you remember when cocaine dealers drive around with one of these things. And that cost me $4,000. And then this thing on the right here costs $100. And that's a Huawei smartphone. And what's blowing my mind is it's not a phone. This thing has more computational power in it by a factor of 100 probably than my first computer. And it costs $100. And so if you sort of go like, okay, I'm about 25, 26, I'm an ideologically sort of visionary design youth, in your lifetime, the cost of producing a high-tech product has gone from ridiculously expensive to nothing. And I'm not saying nothing in sort of a hyperbole sense or in some sort of exaggerating sense. I mean, it's actually free because right now you can go out and get the software that you need and run it on a free laptop and download free software and then host it on a free service and provide it for free and advertise it for free and reap the royalties for free and put it in a free bank account and withdraw that money for free on a free ATM card. The only thing you're missing is the skills. And you can get those for free too, because you can learn all of that for free. And so free, and you go, well, wait a second, if this is all free, maybe I don't actually need to go get the job in a big company and work for 45 years so I can retire, so I can move to Sun City in Austin or outside of Austin, sit in a rocking chair and drink Bud Light, which is really weird. But when I present this to people who are older than 25, this is their first question. What about my mortgage? Are you crazy? I have bills to pay. And that's a totally legitimate point. Because this is super easy when you don't have a mortgage and a family and bills to pay and kids to put to college. You don't have that yet. You sort of have this nice runway. But in fact, even this is starting to be achievable because as a case in point, where am I going to get the money? Well, here's where you can get the money. There's starting to be venture funds funded by designers, funded for designers. There's a fund in San Francisco called the Designer Fund. And it's backed by, among other people, I think Kleiner Perkins, but a lot of the big VC houses are putting money into companies that are founded by people like you, because they go, wait a second, they have something that like traditional business marketing MBAs don't have when they go to found a company. And again, if we turn to Mr. Obama, he's pledged $2 billion in resources for startups. And so there's something about this, leave the machine behind, do your own thing, up by your bootstraps, sure, it's all of American lore and all that nonsense, but maybe you can actually do it. And usually I get this sort of like, wait a second. And I present this a lot, this type of thing a lot to people who are already in consultancies and have jobs, and they say stuff like, you want me to challenge all of my existing norms, quit my really well-paying six-figure job, cut my salary in half, work really long hours, and try to take on the big machine by starting my own company. And they're sort of incredulous because nobody's ever told them that they could do it before. And the answer is yes, that's exactly what I want you to go do. And so I'll give you an example of how it's working. Does anyone have this? This is a Nest thermostat. It's fantastic. It's also really expensive. I think it was like $280. High-end thermostat. Clearly not problems with selling. Keep that in mind. This is the team of Nest. A bunch of ex-Apple hardware guys. They understand how to make and ship physical products and how to do it with really, really intricate computational power behind it. And an interesting thing happened to Nest. David and Goliath, Honeywell sued the shit out of them. Honeywell makes thermostats, and Honeywell's made the same stupid square thermostat that's like that but uglier forever. And all of a sudden, there's this company going like, hey, look at us, look what we can do. And if you actually go poke at Honeywell to determine what sort of a David and Goliath situation you have, this blew my mind. $2 billion in profit last year. $2 billion company is running scared by Nest. And when you talk to the CEO of Nest, when he answers questions from the press, he says stuff like, 7 decades, there appear to be little more technology improvements in the flagship Honeywell thermostat than the replacement of a mechanical display with an LCD. And that's like, ouch. And so again, they got him running scared. Right? This is like 12, 13 guys, or it was when it started, in a garage kind of thing. And now they're getting sued and actually getting a lot of generous support from those Stanford lawyers that we just heard about in response to that lawsuit. And that's just a thermostat, right? What if they were actually doing something worth doing? Maybe you don't actually need that organizational machine. Maybe you don't actually need to go work for those big existing companies. But if you're going to do all of this stuff, you might as well go all in, right? So you might as well actually work solving. And so you can ask yourself the question around content. We all learn how to critique. That's part of going to design school. And you can critique everything about design. There's one thing that is off limits, and that's the content. You're not allowed to say, why are you designing a chair? That's stupid. You have to assume that designing a chair is a good idea. More shoes, really? Not a great idea. No, that's off limits. We can critique the aesthetics of the shoe. We need to change that, and I think we need to start judging the actual content of what it is we're designing too. We need to have a vocabulary and conversation around what is and isn't worth our time. And I'm certainly not going to stand up here and tell you what you should and shouldn't design. I think collectively as a discipline, we need to figure it out. But I know the answer is not more shoes and more chairs. And so let me conclude in this last bit with some examples from my own students about problems worth solving. This is Ruby and Alex, and they were two of my students 2 years ago. Alex was a toy designer at Wild Planet Toys in San Francisco, and Ruby was like a banker or something like that in Toronto. They came to Austin Center for Design, and part of their first program was with Homeless in Austin. And when you talk about Homeless in Austin, it kind of looks like this, which I would imagine looks a lot like that. And so this is actually Church Under the Bridge, which is something that happens under Interstate 35 every Sunday, and it is exactly what it sounds like. People have church under a bridge. And they went there as these do-gooders in design school, and their task was to talk to homeless people. And they came back, and they didn't actually talk to anybody. And when we talked about why, they said, well, what are we supposed to do? Walk up to somebody and say, you look homeless, can we ask you a bunch of questions? And that was a really good point. And so, like, obviously, no, don't do that. That's not very nice. So instead, they came up with something like this, and they put up a big sign that says, hi, can we ask you a question? By the way, this guy's on my cover. This is Speedy. I forget all of Speedy's details. Man, he's a weird dude. And they put up this sign, and they asked people questions. And the question they asked them was, what would you like to have happen by the end of the day? And if you take a second and reflect on that yourself, chances are your answers are not that dissimilar from their answers. And they're things like, well, I would like to eat a good meal. I would like my back to not hurt so much. I'd like to have some time to, go to the gym. I'd like to have some time to think. I hope I get a hug. These are sort of standard human answers to a standard human question, and that was sort of a very democratizing thing for Ruby and Alex. Along the way, they also said, hey, can we see some of the stuff you have? And they also learned that maybe your first impression about homeless as being technically inept and not happening with things is wrong. Almost all of the people they talked to with cell phones, all of the people they talked to with Facebook accounts. Okay, homeless with Facebook, why would they want that? Why would they want the people they went to high school with not to know that they were homeless? That's weird. Oh wait, that's pretty human, right? I mean, that's a pretty human thing to do. This guy down here actually was an IT administrator, and so he knows how to run the Apache server, as an example. He also made some dumb decisions, and so now he's homeless, but he has a laptop and he knows how to use it. And along this conversation, they learned that all of these people know how to do things. And that seems really dumb to say out loud, but it challenges a lot of the preconceptions maybe we all have around homeless. You know how to do things because you had a life probably before you were homeless. In many cases you didn't, but you did. Maybe you had a job, or maybe you had some skills, maybe you went to school. And so there's this essence behind this idea, and we call it an insight, around a service. They said we feel self-actualization is actually at the core of what it means to be human. And we observed people's enhanced self-esteem when they shared their knowledge. They observed homeless people teaching other homeless people things. And they observed those people having increased self-actualization. People were happy, and they felt fulfilled, and they felt good about themselves. These were the experiences and memories that they would talk about with sort of the most love and the most happiness when they reflected on things that they'd done the last week or so. For homeless people to feel empowered, we began to look at what they could teach. And again, in this context, it makes a lot of sense. In the context of most social services, that seems crazy. Why would you give a homeless person anything other than a house and food? Well, wait, maybe we need to give them a way to teach. That's really weird. And so they gave them a way to teach. They built a platform that's called Our School with an H, around the idea of 1-hour classes. And anyone can go online and create a class and then teach it to anybody else, and you charge money, and you get the money. So now, learning and teaching has been democratized to some degree. They make money by taking a small part of the classes, but they drive impact because they empower people. They empower people to be teachers, and anytime you teach something to somebody else, you learn something about yourself. So that's really cool. Good for them. And if you go back to this quote, the the piece that sort of stands out to me is this. They said, we feel and we observed. And that's part of their process. That's part of this design process. And so I sort of want to walk through what I mean by process as it pertains to this idea of a wicked problem. It starts with this notion of insight. And insight is a scary word, and I think for a lot of artists, it's this thing that happens. And so a lot of designers think it's this thing that happens too. But that really boils it down to a trivial moment, and I don't think it's a moment, I think it happens over time. There's some evidence of that philosophically and in literature reaching all the way back to 1900. Charles Peirce, who wrote a lot of the theory and philosophy that most of you ever read if you take ethics class as an example, says that it's an act of insight. It's extremely fallible insight. It's the idea of putting together two things that we've never dreamed of putting together, and it flashes new suggestions before our contemplation. This very well may be how new ideas are formed in your brain, neurologically, too. And so the big point here is that when they went and did research for the homeless, they didn't get the answer from the homeless. They got the answer from themselves. But talking to those people provoked it. And so they had to have a point of view about how the world should be and about how things like learning and education should be, and then have experiences that are sort of outside of their realm of normalness to provoke that. The other half of this is that it's an insight about a wicked problem, and so I want to take a second and define what that means. Maybe best illustrated by a couple examples. A well-structured problem is something that a computer can simulate. Okay? That's something that you can write an algorithm around. And a really obvious example of that is checkers. Not a very good use of designers' time to solve the game of checkers. But designers love to spend their time on ill-structured problems. Herb Simon, who was one of my professors at Carnegie Mellon, talked about ill-structured problems because he was trying to get computers to simulate them and solve them. He was focused on artificial intelligence, and his end pursuit was, ideally, decision learning in computation. How can we get computers to do designer-like problem solving? He might have reached the conclusion that you can't by the end of his career. This is an example of a ill-defined problem. Rebrand Budweiser. And so designers do their thing, and out pops the thing at the end. Right? You can't feed that problem into a computer and get any good, any optimized result at the end. Now, some computer scientists might disagree with that, but at least right now you can't. And that's good news for all the designers. But there's this third form of problems too, and they're called wicked problems. Not every hard problem is a wicked problem. Here's some criteria for them, and there's this notion of societal, intertwined and interconnected relationships between problems. This is the notion that education and poverty and socioeconomic status and policies and things like that are all interconnected. You can't just fix one, and in fact, arguably, you can't fix any of them. And I'll show you what that might look like, although you certainly don't have to look far around here to see them. This is evidence of a wicked problem. This is from some of the frog work in Nairobi. I used to work at a company called Frog, and Michael Sederick, who's one of my colleagues, took this picture. This is a business. This is evidence of a wicked problem focused around business, because this is where you go to top up, to get more minutes on your phone. Because people don't carry balances on their phone, because they don't have any money. And so they have phones, but they're not able to call, but they're able to receive. And so this is entrepreneurship. That's a little weird, right? But this is what it looks like. And so if there's this notion of well-structured, ill-structured, and wicked problems, we need to start judging the content of design. And I would say we need to start moving from the left to the right and focusing on those wicked problems. When we start judging the content of design, very quickly we get into a conversation around not all of these problems being equal. Another way of saying that is that these problems are not all equally worth your time. And so if you have your druthers and get to pick, here's what I want to work on, it behooves you to think a little bit about what am I sacrificing by working on that or that rather than that. So let me sum it all up with this idea of social entrepreneurship. A lot of people who are in a designer position feel like this is the choice you have. With you as an exception, I think you said, I'm not doing anything with clients, and I'm not doing anything with companies, and props to that. But most people feel trapped here. I have have to go corporate or I have to go to an agency, and that's it. That's the only choice. And that's wrong. There's a lot more choices. One of which is, what if you start your own thing? And what if you start your own thing and use inexpensive technology, free technology, as a way to provide a service, because that service can then be exponentially scaled and amplified in the context of social and humanitarian problems. Technology is really good at driving network effects. It's really good at amplifying a message. And so you can use that technology, which is free, to help alleviate some of the issues surrounding some of these really nasty things going on in the world. And again, yeah, it's hard. It's not that hard, because you already know how to do it. Okay, the way you do this is the way you do any other design problem. You do a little research, and you think really hard about it, and then you make something. And then you kind of reflect on what you made, and you do it again. And it's no different with a business. It's a process for humanizing technology, and it's what we're good at. And so why don't we redirect it from making stuff for consumption to actually changing the world? This is a process of social entrepreneurship. And it's also the process of design. And what's really interesting here is it doesn't have to be for free. Because if you start with this idea that you're going to affect change in the circles of poverty or education or something that requires that sort of impact, it turns out that other people like to use it too. And so on our school, you can go get classes in banjo stringing because somebody who knows how to string banjos wanted to teach it. And you have no idea if that's a homeless teacher or not, and it doesn't matter. Because the solution that's useful to the people who happen to have church under the bridge is also useful to the guy who knows how to string banjos and wants to make a little side money, and by the way, loves talking about banjo stringing. So the message that I hope you take is to leave the organizational machine behind. I think that you can realize the disruptive power of design, and that if you give yourself permission, you can actually take on problems